Hey there. So I've been working on a first-person sword combat game called Castle Wars, and honestly the combat system has been kind of lacking. So there was only a primary attack, at least animation-wise. There was no secondary or melee. The sword was just floating. We're going to fix all of that today. Then we're going to add weapon sway, we're going to overhaul the hit detection, the lunging system, and in the next video we're going to be building multiplayer. So get subscribed or you might miss it. Alright, let's go. Hi. So I guess we should start by adding some arms. You know, I love the Wii Sports art style. I just don't think it's gonna work in this game. So here's some arms. They're from a nature manufacturer asset I got in a Humble Bundle a while ago, and sort of like the data box settings video, I want to recuperate some of that value so I have a little less buyer's remorse, because every single time there's a Unity Humble Bundle, I buy it. Smash rivals, oh, I see. Obviously, the T-posing arms aren't really going to get us anywhere animation-wise. This gives me an opportunity to learn how to rig arms, which is kind of nice. So Unity has a package called Animation Rigging, which is, you know, a pretty simply named package. It has a lot of the same features as, say, Blender when it comes to animation rigging and inverse kinematics, which is IK for short, if you've ever seen that acronym. I'm not going to explain how to rig the arms. There's like very good videos on YouTube that go over all of that. But once the arms were rigged, it gives you this point, the like hand target, which you could just move around, and inverse kinematics will do the rest of the animating for us. Since I haven't decided that I'm gonna like fully develop the game, still gotta get to playtesting for that, I'm not gonna animate these very well. I'm just gonna move these endpoints and let it figure out the rest. And I if you need some supply. So I spent a couple hours making some pretty crappy animations, but they were simple. It was for the primary attack, the secondary attack, the melee, blocking, to and from blocking, sheathing, unsheathing, basically everything that I would need down the line. I'm unsure how much footage I actually have of these first draft animations because I did a lot of them over the Christmas break and I was on my laptop and I didn't have OBS yet. You know, they weren't really that great. They got the job done, but they still felt floaty. They felt like the sword had no weight and they didn't really use the screen space effectively. I stuck with these for a while. I hadn't played many sword combat games before, and so all the animations are sort of loosely based off of my memory of the Halo Energy Sword. The animations weren't great. I'm sure this will never come back to bite me in the ass, okay? It's an affirmation. These will not come back to bite me in the ass. So now I've easily created some simple animations for attacking and idling and blocking and sheathing. And Unity controls animations for a model using a component that's conveniently named the animation controller. I have it set up like this. For the uninitiated, the way that you'd read this is like a flowchart. So any state can go into unsheathed, which leads into the idle animation. And idle is the state in which the sword is going to stay unless a combat action is taking place. All the movement and look swaying will be done procedurally, and we'll get to that later. From the idle state, the sword can go to any of the three attacks, to blocking or to sheathed. A Boolean value has to be set to true to signal to the controller to play each animation, blocking, each attack, and sheathing. They all have separate Boolean values, and when one of them gets set to true, the controller will stay in that state until that respective Boolean has been set to false. So I mentioned that weapon sway, which includes like movement, swaying, look swaying, that sort of stuff, is all going to be handled procedurally, and this is mostly just so that I can be lazy and not have to worry about animating it. Okay, so basically the weapon has a sway position which gets calculated before each rendered frame, and that's just an aggregation of a bunch of different functions. So there's a function for how far back the sword should be when you're dashing, because if you're moving forwards then it's going to come backwards, inertia. There's a separate function for look sway, for movement sway, for lunging, dashing, and sliding, which are all kind of one. And then there's a crouch modifier, a jumping modifier. There's a bob for when you're walking and an even faster bob for when you're running. Oh, and if you block an attack, it'll come towards you. Yeah, so I don't have to handle any of those with actual animations. There's just a little sound cue, and then the sway position gets updated. It's just an aggregation of a bunch of functions. It's like if you had an f of x and a g of x, you add them together. That's literally it. So this section's on new sword properties. The first is a movement speed multiplier, which, as the name might suggest, it's a multiplier that when you're using that sword will either increase or decrease the player's movement speed by a ratio, by a multiplier. And then second, there is the lunge lock distance, which is about how far, I shouldn't even say about, it's exactly how far you can be away from an enemy and still be able to lunge at them. And then lastly, there is the pickup object, which we'll get into sword drops later in the video, but it's something I wanted to add for game type customization, just because, it'd be nice to be able to pick up other swords depending on what the custom game is. So yeah, it's just a little pickup prefab that you can add, and it will spawn in when the player dies. Okay, so sheathing. All right, so I think that sheathing is actually a necessity, and that's because the way that this is going to work is, so the player is going to start with the sword sheath, it will unsheath, and then go into the idle state. From the idle state, you can do all the attacking, the blocking, the normal sword stuff. But while the player is on a ladder or swimming, things that would require your hands, and therefore you can't really attack or block, the sword's going to be sheathed. And for the entire duration of both the sheathing animations and while it is sheathed, and this is sort of the same for when the sword is blocking and then the to and the from of the block, the ability to attack is entirely gone. And that's just because it was a bug, where specifically I noticed it when you were coming out of a block and you would try to attack, you would hit the attack button, but because the animation wouldn't play, you would have no visual feedback other than the little UI indicator that you were attacking. So this is actually a necessity, I think. I made a whole video on this one. It'll be in the thingy right there. Yeah, it'll also be in the description. Just check that out. I made the video while I was actually implementing all of this stuff, so it's pretty funny. You get to see me goof and gag, and well, not gag. You get to see me goof around, and it's funny because you get to watch the process. And yeah, go watch that. It's a good video. I'll search you. So this is the point where I realized I was being bitten in the ass. And the biggest issue with the combat was still the feeling of the sword swing animation itself. The swings were clunky, they felt like I was moving foam around, and so I decided to do some quote-unquote required reading. So I spent some time both playing and analyzing video of a bunch of other games, specifically sword combat games, because even though I play a lot of shooters, I don't play a lot of sword combat games, and I'm developing one, so I need to change that. So these are games I already had. I wasn't really willing to buy a bunch of games just to play them for 20 minutes, swing a sword around, and then return them. The required reading list that I had was first Halo Reach, and I feel like that one's kind of self-explanatory because of how much I've based this game off of Halo Reach. Then there was Minecraft, both pre and post the combat update. I hate to say it, but I didn't gather much knowledge from this one. I kind of just got sucked into the 2-week Minecraft hole. Yeah. And then I played Breath of the Wild, and I mean, I've been playing this since I finally ponied up for a Switch. I just stepped on my laptop. I've been playing Breath of the Wild since I finally ponied up for a Switch. The melee combat, it feels really good. I don't know what kind of crack they were putting in Breath of the Wild, but they were putting some crack in it. This one sort of taught me that, the animations don't have to be that long. They can be really quick, they can be really simple, because you're not really focused on the animation itself, you're focused on what you're hitting, what you're attacking, and that sort of feedback. The other thing I noticed is that my sort of flat pacing isn't doing me any favors. So the next game was Skyrim, and Admittedly, I haven't played much Skyrim. I wouldn't mind playing it in full at some point, but it's just a game that hasn't captivated me. I don't really like how much the camera shakes for larger weapons. It makes me feel a little uneasy, but camera shake is an important thing. So I guess the last game on this required reading list is Valheim. And I really like the animations in this, not because they're like super bombastic or super flashy, but because like Breath of the Wild, they're sort of simple. You're gonna be doing a lot of attacks, so you don't really want something that's flashy that even though it looks cool once or twice, it's gonna get a little annoying when you have to sit through that whole flashy animation every single time you attack. There's definitely some subtleties that I wanna steal from it, like the body really sells the weight of the swing. So how do I make my sword animations feel better? So the first thing is animation pacing. What I learned from Halo, and primarily just, dissecting frame by frame energy sword animations, is that it really is like 1/3 is the wind up, another 1/6 is the swing, and then the other half is the reset. The swing itself is really fast. That's why in Breath of the Wild, the swing animations are so short, is just because you spend most of your time when you're actually swinging a sword doing the stuff around the swing. The wind up and the follow through and the reset. That's where most of your time is going to be spent, not the actual swing. So another thing I noticed when I was dissecting these animations was that the energy sword goes entirely off the screen one way, and then you swing and it goes entirely off the screen the other way. That sort of conveys the total breadth of the swing, and it makes the swing feel more impactful. A little bit of a side note, I did some research, and apparently all of the Halo models, the view models in Halo, are animated at a 77-degree FOV. They have that weapon camera set at 77 degrees so that, if you increase the game FOV, it doesn't make the animation sort of pointless when you come back and you can see like the end, like the elbow is where the arm ends. So I guess, sorry Team Fortress 2 players, you're not gonna get stretched out models from this game. So I also implemented a camera shake system because I noticed that with all the Halo swings, even though you don't really notice the camera shake being there, right after the sort of apex of the swing, there is a little bit of camera shake to simulate your head being like pulled. And that does like a huge bit to sell the actual swing. I also, like I said in Valheim, the body will do a lot of selling the actual sword swing animation. So I made it so that the shoulder joint of the model gets rotated, which, even though it's very subtle, does a little bit to help sell the weight of the swing. Sound is another big component of selling visuals, and I've known this for a while as a video editor, but there's 4 sounds that I feel are integral to the feeling of the sword swing. One is when the sword swings, there's a little bit of an air swoosh because you're going really fast. Then there's the vocal effort from the players, like a grunt. I don't play those every single swing because that would get really annoying. Then there's also, the surface hit sound and the fleshy enemy hitting sound when you actually hit something, which is just a little bit of audio feedback to let you know what's going on. Yeah, so you might not notice that these sounds exist sometimes, but you definitely will notice when they aren't there. This is gonna be hard for me to figure out because I gotta look at the camera in the mirror. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to revamp hit detection a little bit. It wasn't broken necessarily, but there were a couple of issues with it. And the first is that the sword, it would collect collision data for a little too long. It would basically get the entire windup. So if you hit something back here, it would count, and it would get this, which is normal, and then also like over here, and then the reset. So it would collect for way too long. The hitbox was also attached to the sword, so if I changed the animation, I changed the hit detection as well. And it also meant that the hitboxes were different depending on the weapon sway. So if you were lunging, then the hitboxes were actually closer to you. It's not consistent. So what I wanted to do was move the hit detection system away from the sword visual. I wanted to have it be its own thing. So to remedy this, I created a system which plays animations on a collider which is attached to the player character. So this way the hit detection is separate from the sword itself, and specifically it's separate from the sword visual. And I can make small adjustments to the animations without it changing the feel of the attacks, which I think is a good thing. The hit detection collider actually still follows the trajectory of the sword, but it's not exact, and it's for a shorter amount of time. It's just from about here to about here, rather than being the entire sword swing animation, which means that you have to actually attack them. You can't just hit the sword button and run into them. So now I could transition really smoothly into an advertiser talking point, or even continue talking about a second advertiser talking point. But instead, I'm going to tell you about how our sponsor today, if someone is there, please sponsor me. I need money. So lunging is a mechanic that I feel is integral to the experience of like Halo Reach. That is a mechanic that I'm bringing into Castle Wars because it makes the feel of the sword a little better. It makes the attacks connect better, and it reinforces the arcade style gameplay of the game. So my first implementation of lunging, which I did in the second devlog, is pretty clunky. It really just makes sure that the enemy that you're looking at is within range. It makes sure that there's nothing that would obstruct the lunge. There's nothing in between you and the enemy, and then it would take the position of the enemy and it would translate to that position over the next 0.3 seconds. At face value, that sort of seems fine, good, dandy, but there's two main issues. The first is that if the enemy moves, then the player is lunging to a position which is no longer accurate. So we need to change it so that it lunges to a moving target over time. And the second is that it's kind of just too long. 0.3 seconds, though it doesn't seem very long, is a long time when it comes to the feel of the lunge. The attack originally would not trigger until the lunge was over, so it would literally just block you for 0.3 seconds and then attack, which is just a little too slow. So I changed the duration of the lunge to be a proportion of how far the enemy is from the player. So if the lunge lock distance is 8, then if they are 8 units away, it'll take the full 0.25 seconds. Or if they're 4 units away, then it'll take 0.125, which is half of that time to lunge. So it's proportional to how far they are now. The attack will now trigger once it's within the range of the actual attack, rather than once the lunge is over, just to make you feel like you're locked out for a little bit less time. Some other feedback I got is that certain attacks shouldn't be able to lunge and certain attacks should. And this does take away from the arcade feel of the game, but I feel like it might be necessary for balancing. If every single attack can lunge, then it's just one less thing that I have to like specifically balance the game. Yeah, so I'm gonna try and stick with the certain attacks can lunge and certain attacks can't approach, but if at some point it just feels wrong, I will revert that. The attack UI also now has an indicator to let you know which attacks can lunge, and there's an icon slightly underneath the crosshair which will pop up when you're able to lunge, when you're within the lunge lock distance.
And you, 'cause it's me and you.
Okay, so this is a hyper programming specific segment. If you want to skip to the next one because it's going to be a little boring, I put chapters in the description, or you can click on the play bar. Okay, so now that the normies are gone, I got really tired of having to write switch statements for each of the different attacks. So like if I wanted to get the damage value for an attack, I'd have to be like switch, and then in whatever the attack type is, and then be like, okay, so we're going to get the primary, secondary, or melee value. And in order to stop writing these switch statements, I created a scriptable object class, which is something I hadn't done before, but it's a nice feature of Unity. Each attack, it has its own object, and the attack object will store the values for like damage, range, if it can lunge or not, stuff like that, in a easily modifiable, easily referenced object. And so I can just pass one of these objects into a function, and I don't have to do any more of these switch statements to pull from the weapon component itself. The play bar is getting really close to the next section. Wait, fuck! Quickly, what search algorithm do you think I can get a girl from? Hello, people who don't really like programming. It's okay, I get it. What's important is that you're back. No, you didn't miss anything. I don't know why you'd ask me that. This was like maybe the first or second bit that I recorded, and as you can tell, it's nighttime now. Like, look, it's nighttime. If I'm redoing a section, that means there's something wrong with it. I didn't look at the footage until I was in Premiere, and my body was like here. And this doesn't look good on video, so we're redoing it. And because we're redoing it, and I feel like we have a nondescript, alcohol-free, wink wink, advertiser-friendly brown liquid. Yeah. Okay, so this section is on sword drops. Alright, so I'm going to be implementing multiple different new swords in the coming weeks. And that's just because there's only one type of sword right now. It's the D type, which stands for default type. I might change it to a B because it looks like a broadsword. But that's the only sword in the game right now. You know, for a game all about sword combat, there needs to be multiple swords. And so my plan is that I'm going to add 4 swords over the next little bit. Hopefully 1 a week. Hopefully. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. Yeah, so 4 more swords. That's not all that's going to be in the game. It's just enough that I feel like, you know, 5 is a good prototyping number. This section is on sword drops. Basically, because I'm adding in all these new swords, and this game is mostly going to be centered around custom games, I want you to be able to customize the options of the game. I want you to be able to either have sword drops on or off, and in order to have on or off, there needs to be the ability to have sword drops. So yeah, I mentioned earlier that there was a new field on the swords that just contains a prefab that will drop when a player dies, and that is just a pickup of the sword that can be turned on or off depending on whether the game mode wants that. Yeah, it's pretty simple. The 4 swords that I'm going to be adding in are 1, the K type, which is a katana; 2, the G type, which is a glaive and will probably be modeled after Destiny 2; 3rd one is the E type. It's based off the energy sword from Halo. Then there is the S and S type, which is the sword and shield. And that's why I was mentioning earlier the whole idea of blocking either a percentage of damage or changing around like the angle that you can block damage from as a stat. And that's just because with the sword and shield, I might want to play around with that. Maybe that's the only sword that can block all of the damage at any given time. There's gonna be a short little video on each sword. You probably won't have to hear me talking through it. It'll just be some music and a demo of the animations and everything. And then after that, I'm gonna, have to make a networking solution, which is what I've been saying for a year now, is that the next video is gonna be networking. And that seems to just, not happen. But, whatever. All right. Okay, so classic walking up a hill shot. I drove all the way out here and then realized I had no way of bringing the script. So yeah, we're here. I guess, thanks for watching the video. Usual stuff. I'm probably gonna go radio silent for a bit because I have to develop a network solution once I finish doing all the swords and stuff. Yeah, I guess, while I'm silent, if you want to download my games, Launch My Dog, Poke My Balls, they're on the App Store and the Android Google Play Store. Yeah. Also, if you want to, subscribe so you can see the network solution or the other swords, you can also like the video. Sharing it would be cool. I think you don't even have to actually put it anywhere. If you just want to click the link and it says link copied, that's enough. The algorithm will think I'm cool. So yeah, you don't even have to actually put it anywhere. You just have to click that copy link thing. All right, see ya.
I'm counting the seconds till somebody mentions your name.